All right. Do you want to do the episode title thing?
Yes. You want me to say the whole thing? Okay, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want? So we did record the James Bond episode that we haven't posted yet, so I could flip them around and do Severance first, and have James Bond come out after that. So tell me do you have a preference?
Uh, might as well, since we're gonna have a little less this week, and you like to put Severance out early. I think that's a good idea since this one's more timely.
All right, let's do that. All right, here we go. Episode 1178. There's Something About Severance, Season 2, Episode 7.
That's you.
Welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian bringing you all down warp speed. I'm Ben Anderson.
I'm Ben DiBono. We're back, and this is our first video. I turned it down too fast. I'm not good at this.
No,
yet.
it feels odd for me to not be in charge of the music, and I was totally thrown off.
You missed your cue after hundreds of episodes, but our first video Severance episode, which I'll go ahead and put up on YouTube tonight or tomorrow once we're done doing it, and then you'll post the audio version as well. I was telling you before we started, for those who are watching on YouTube, I've never been a hat person. So I think I'm pulling it off right now. I had messy hair, so I wouldn't put on a hat. But people can let us know, especially people who have only listened to us and are now seeing us. Have they envisioned me as a hat person?
Yeah.
If so, is this what you pictured? If not, does it work for you?
I think you look great. So I'll be the first commenter. Way to go.
Well, thank you. Okay. We got so much to talk about.
I know. And I was just looking through my notes that I sent you last week because I think I even missed some things that I might have wanted to mention last time, but I'll limit it to just one note. One note. Now we're going back to episode 6. So the very end of episode 6, there was a song that played.
In case there are any new people watching, this is the first one up on YouTube. We're going to go full spoilers through episode 7, Chikhai Bardo of Severance. So season 2, episode 7, full spoilers.
All the spoilers. So right now I just want to quickly mention, during the closing credits of episode 6, which was, remind me of the title of that one? We just did it.
Yeah, I know, but our life's been dominated. Attila.
Of course, yes. The closing song was called Sunshine of Your Love. To me, maybe I'm looking too far into it, but because I've seen such a connection between Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Severance, I was wondering, could Sunshine of Your Love be pointing us towards Eternal Sunshine?
Well, does that song play in Eternal Sunshine? I can't remember.
I don't know. I don't think so, but I did just start rewatching it, Eternal Sunshine, this afternoon. I was thinking about trying to finish it before we recorded, but wasn't able to. But yeah, I would guess not, but who knows?
Because for some reason I feel like it does, but maybe I'm thinking of a trailer, or maybe it's just the word sun in both of them.
Yeah, sunshine.
Right? Association. If that isn't an intentional point back there, there's certainly a lot of other things. I think this
like
episode,
Montauk, of course,
from
2 episodes ago or something.
Right. This episode especially, I think a lot of the editing, which I want to talk about, reminds me of Eternal Sunshine as well.
Mm-hmm.
This episode was just a masterpiece in terms of editing. We'll talk about that, but
all right, we'll dive in. I'll say one more thing, since we are on YouTube and we don't do a lot of Severance episodes here, listeners. We've been covering in a deep dive fashion every episode of Severance this season. So check out the sci-fi-christian.com, and then you can listen to all the podcasts. But this is the only video version that exists, and it actually only exists because we couldn't get together in real life this week. So here we are virtually. It's weird. Yeah. The only episodes that make it to YouTube are the episodes where we can't meet up like we usually do.
We might need to solve for that at some point, but for this works. Okay, so we went through at the end of the last episode, we played the intro for us and talked about observations. There was a few things that I noticed this time that we didn't notice when we were doing that quick last time. The first one is a small thing, and then I think the other two are a little bit bigger, one of which becomes significant after this episode. So the small thing is we've commented on Mark's little recovery drinks that he's been doing since he reintegrates. He knocks those over at one point in the intro. Small thing, but just another little Easter egg. The two things that are significant after this episode are, A, the presence of babies now makes a lot more sense after this episode than it did before.
Okay. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, for sure. And then especially the Kier baby at the end is suggestive, depending on where all this goes. But the one thematic thing I found really interesting, and I have to both make fun of you and compliment you a little bit for the same thing, because this episode does kill your "it's always winter" theory.
Yes, you're right.
So
they had Christmas.
They had Christmas, so you're wrong, but you're also not wrong. And here's what I mean. You're wrong as far as it being like a clue of they live in Narnia or something like that, which I know isn't what you were saying. But
that's not what I was saying at all.
Right, but it's not a clue as far as that they're like in some kind of virtual reality or anything like that. But you're right that it's a thematic clue, in that the contrast is really, really strong in this episode in particular. And there's a moment in the intro where we see Mark, I think it's his Audi carrying his innie. You've got the two, the one wearing the gray shirt, the one wearing the red shirt. And as he kind of slips under the door,
right,
we see him running across a field of snow. And as he carries his innie out, the snow melts and turns into grass. So you were absolutely right, not in a clue way, but in a thematic way, that this is very significant to what the show is doing. And we saw that play out this week.
So not to get too in the weeds on it, but then are you saying perhaps as the show wraps up, we'll be getting into more of a springtime atmosphere?
If they stay with that motif, yeah. I mean, who knows if they continue to lean into that as much? And I guess that the next episode could be in summer or whatever. But the innies are allowed to wear shorts to the office. Who knows? But at least for this season, absolutely. Okay. So that was interesting. And then the other thing I always like to call out here at the beginning is some of the influences. A couple that we'll talk about as we go, but we're getting really heavy at this point as far as influences go. And there's two things I want to talk about right from the get-go, and then they'll kind of play throughout our conversation, but let's get them out there at the start. So the first one is the two Tolstoy books that are referenced. So we have The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is mentioned a number of times throughout the episode. And I've read, the only Tolstoy I'd read prior to last night and today when I read Death of Ivan Ilyich was War and Peace and Anna Karenina. So I was kicking myself because I was thinking, man, I haven't read Death of Ivan Ilyich, and it's probably 1,400 pages like those books are. Lo and behold, it's a novella. I got an edition off of Audible that I was able to get through in a couple of hours. I did a long run today, so it worked out great. So I read The Death of Ivan Ilyich really, really fast. Fantastic. I'm going to reference some things about that as we go, but there's some really suggestive themes in that. The other Tolstoy novel that gets mentioned very briefly is when Mark visits Gemma at her office, and she says, I have to go. I'm giving a lecture on Haji Murat, which is Tolstoy's final novel. Again, haven't read it, but looking it up a little bit on Wikipedia, it is about a soldier who joins his enemies to get revenge on other people in his life, which is perhaps suggestive of what we're seeing play out with Milchek and or Kobel.
Okay.
Here.
Wow. That would be interesting.
Okay. And that's just the minor reference. That's just the minor influence that we're getting into. The more significant one is what this show is doing now with the afterlife and the concept of the underworld. So let's start with the title, Chikhai Bardo, which if we were the sci-fi Buddhist, we would have picked up on this already. Okay. So Chikhai Bardo within the plot is the name of the fertility program that she gets in the mail, presumably from Lumen. Lumen's fingerprints are all over this whole process.
For a second, because we see the card that we saw in season 1. Yes. But what does that have to do with fertility?
So it, th- let's get to that part as we talk through the episode, because it'll make more sense as we progress through it.
So the program is called
Chikhai Bardo.
I don't think I pick up on that. No, did you watch it twice like you usually do?
Absolutely.
So this time, because it's such a dense episode in a good way, I felt like perhaps I should watch it twice. Didn't have a chance.
I got so much more out of it the second time, which I always do, but this one especially. So Chikhai Bardo, did you happen to look up at all what that term means?
No.
So in Buddhism, again, not a Buddhist, so I'm probably going to butcher this, but will be directionally accurate. The cycle of life to rebirth is made up of 6 Bardos. I don't know what the term Bardo means, and I'm probably mispronouncing it, but Chikhai Bardo is the name for the 4th one, which is the moment of death that eventually triggers the cycle of rebirth. Okay, so that's what we're seeing a little bit with Gemma. All of this ties into, though, that the show is now playing very heavily with the concept of the underworld, and specifically the underworld as it is conceived in classical mythology. The theme of reincarnation being present in Chikhai Bardo as well as in classical mythology distinguishes it from, say, the more Western Christian view of heaven and hell. It is suggestive, I think, if we go all the way back to season 1, the pilot's title. Do you remember what the title of the pilot episode is? It's called The Good News About Hell.
Okay.
So the show has been playing with the concept of hell from the very beginning. And of course, as a Dante fan, I'm going to see trace references in here, specifically with the in the Divine Comedy, we have Beatrice needing to rescue Dante by leading him through hell. That's more tangential. The two influences that we really need to seize on, and one of them has already been name dropped in the show at the beginning of this season. Mark, after the OTC, I forget the exact concept of it, but he uses the name Persephone. And Persephone is one of 2 classical Greek myths that we need to put our finger on to understand what's going on. So the story of Persephone is the goddess of spring. And in the myth, she is abducted by Hades and she is abducted by Hades and taken to live in the underworld. Eventually, she escapes and returns to the upper world. Again, it's the cycle of rebirth and reincarnation. You can see why she's the goddess of spring, right? Like, this is what, if you're explaining the concept of spring and seasons in mythological terms, this is what happens every single year. Spring is abducted and returns.
I thought that she was allowed, and I might be remembering this wrong, I thought she was allowed to leave once a year, and then that is spring.
I'm going to defer to you because, as you've proven on the Aeneid episodes, you're the Greek
that's right
expert.
So she's abducted and not just held in Hades, but she becomes the queen of the underworld.
Correct. You're correct. Which, boy, is that suggestive of what we're seeing with her and Dr. Maurer, and even his line. And I don't want to talk about this in detail now. We'll get to it in context, but you will see the world again, and the world will see you. Feels very Persephone and Hades-esque. Okay. The other myth that we need to pay attention to is that of Orpheus. So Orpheus, his wife dies, and he goes to he has to go to the underworld to attempt to rescue her. And he fails at doing so. That's one of the features of that myth. It's very Lot's wife thing. He's told by, ironically enough, Hades and Persephone that he can lead her out of the underworld, but if he looks back before they are out, she'll be gone forever. At the very end, when he is out of the underworld, but she's still a few steps behind, he turns around, looks back, and she disappears. So we are playing, like, even in my notes, I'm just mentally referring to the floor that Gemma is on as the underworld.
Yeah.
And it's an important distinction because, again, it's not hell in the sense that of the Christian version of hell. The show is leaning into more of the Greek Roman version of the underworld with the emphasis on reincarnation, hence the Chikhai Bardo thing. For those who are reading along with us on the Aeneid, we even saw this in book 6 of the Aeneid over on our Patreon feed. where when Aeneas is in the underworld, remember one of the final things he sees is the people who are awaiting rebirth, right? So the concept of reincarnation, while not as prominent in Greek and Roman myth as it is, say, in Eastern philosophy and Eastern religions, is present there. And I, what all of this is going to mean as far as plot points or theme, I don't know, but it's not accidental. The show's leaning extremely hard into this, and it's totally fascinating.
Yeah, you said referring to it as the underworld. I totally forgot that in season 1, Cobell said, send her back to the testing floor. Right. Because you and I have been predicting that there is a lower floor, and we thought maybe that's just where people are living. Maybe people have been kidnapped. I mean, yes, technically that's true. I guess I was picturing more of a bunch of houses, just like we saw. There was an episode in season 1 where they went to the recreation of Kira's house. I think I was picturing you go downstairs, and also PD's map showed houses. So I thought that that's where Gemma was being held. I didn't envision pretty much a prison, although I knew it would be technically a prison. I thought it would be more homey, but instead, I forgot the term testing floor, and you and I don't think ever brought that up. We should have.
That's true. We did. I think PD's map too, that tells us that we need to take it as directional rather than absolute. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think even he says people live here, and I believe there's question marks on the map.
Oh, right, yeah.
Like, PD's piecing this together within the show from imprecise information.
Right. So technically, yes, Gemma lives there, but not by choice, and it's not a happy place.
Yeah, it's the worst kind of prison, right? As we'll see, like, she literally can't escape. Mm-hmm. Literally. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the way I have this organized, I know the show is interspersing really our 3 plots. We have the flashback, we have everything in the underworld, and then we have a little bit here and there with Mark's recovery. I divided them out. I do want to call out, and we already talked about it a little bit, but for a show that's consistently well made, this week is an exemplary version take on filmmaking. And the director, I forget her name, but she's the cinematographer of the show. It's her directorial debut. Absolutely incredible. And there's one shot in the middle of the episode where it starts with Miss Casey standing behind Innie Mark saying she's there to observe Helly, and then the camera kind of pans out, goes up to the ceiling, and this is where we then get to the whatever refining the lookalikes down below, who I'm sure we'll talk about. That shot was no CGI. It's really incredible. Wow. Yeah, just incredible that they're pulling this off. You can't say enough about how well this episode was put together from a filmmaking perspective.
Yeah, more doubles. And why? Like, to do the job that they were doing, they don't have to look like them. But they did.
Or do they? I don't. There's so much we don't know. Okay, so how do you want to take this?
Maybe those are the people that were out on the Orpo.
Yeah, I mean, people have suggested that, which I guess blows a hole in my augmented reality interpretation. I've said it before. As long as this show keeps knocking it out of the park, I don't care if my theories are right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, I theorized last week that Bert was going to be the whistling doctor. Wrong. Right. I don't care. Blow all my theories out of the water. As long as they're doing this good, I'm up for whatever.
Exactly. It's fun to theorize about this show, but I feel like it's the kind of show where there's no way to exactly know where they're going.
Yeah, and it's fun because, like, some of the things that are quote-unquote mysteries, like, is it really Helly? Super easy to figure out. And so you feel smart watching along with the show, but then you get to, like, end of episode 3, Mark gets reintegrated. Like, boy, am I excited to see what happens next. Bam! Ortbo, next episode.
Exactly.
Yeah. And 5 weeks ago, nobody on planet Earth, except people who work for the show, knew what the term Ortbo was. And now it's just like this widely used part of internet parlance. It's fantastic. Okay, should we start with the flashback and work our way through that and then get into the Dr. Maurer stuff?
Yeah, I think if we go, in a sense, in universe chronologically, that could work.
Yeah, except what exactly is the chronology of the second part? But we'll get there. Okay, so the prevailing theory on the internet as they meet at this blood drive is that the blood drive is organized by Lumen.
Okay.
And collecting samples of them, and that Lumen from from all this stuff. I don't know if I didn't catch anything even on the second viewing that explicitly said this was a Lumen blood drive, but they're in the town of Kier. Right. They're at what I presume is Kier University or something like that. It's not a far-fetched theory. And I think it's obvious, and there's more explicit clues as we go through the flashback scenes, that Lumen is directly looking for people to recruit who will be good candidates for whatever it is they're doing on the testing floor.
But when you say recruit, do you mean also maybe abduct?
Yeah, abduct. I don't subscribe to the theory that Gemma goes along with them willingly, but you could interpret things in this episode to suggest that.
I could see that also.
Yes.
That did cross my mind. If I was on the spot, I'd say no, that's not the case, but I could see that happening.
It doesn't rule it out.
Right.
And it doesn't rule it out intentionally. So
like, what do you think that a potential story is? They told her if she was to come with them, they could help her get pregnant, but she'd have to keep it a secret.
And that's the whole Chikhai Bardo thing from that program, which we'll get there, but she's clearly applying for something. Right. She's doing some tests there with that.
Yeah.
So a couple other interesting things in this first scene. Mark asks her the Severance favorite question, "Who are you?" He does it in a playful way, but I've now trained to sit up anytime I hear that mentioned.
Yeah, the first line of the whole show.
Correct. And then we get the two papers that they're working on. Ivan Ilyich is the major one, but do you recall the one Mark is
something all clear on the West Blunt, maybe?
all quiet on the Western Blunt, which is a fantastic paper. The interesting thing about Ivan Ilyich is, so I like I said, I read this novella last night and today, and there's a lot I can see from it. I think that if I don't find a good spot in the episode, when we wrap up, I want to just read one quick excerpt from it that I think is suggestive. But what they call out, or Gemma calls out, and by they I mean the show writers, because they're putting these words in her mouth, is that the paper she's reading is about religious conversion in The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is certainly a theme in the novella, not the only one. So it's not as though the novel, he has religious conversion at the end. You know, the novel, if you haven't read it, and to steal the show's joke, he dies at the end. You know, it's spoilers, which I also think was the show just slightly jabbing all of us theorizers too, which is kind of fun. Right. You know, it's about Ivan Ilyich. He's an important official in his town. He sustains an injury, goes through the process of dying, and realizes that he's spent his life on the wrong things. The novel ends with him asking for God's forgiveness in his final moments. So, you know, among other things, religious conversion is in there. But the reason I think that's possibly significant, at least thematically, is that Lumen is a cult. If Gemma does go along with them willingly, you could interpret that as a religious conversion. Okay. Even if she goes along with them unwillingly, it could be a forced religious conversion. So that theme is significant to me. That they call that out.
We didn't see this on the show, but do you think a side flashback story that we didn't see could be that she was slowly, and maybe this is what you're saying, she was converting to this whole belief in whatever is like the Kier religion that Cobell is a follower of? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, they set it up through the lens of her pregnancy and infertility, right? Like that, what we see is she especially, both her and Mark are struggling with this, but she especially is so desperate to conceive that she's willing to go to more and more lengths to get there.
We also know there's a likely Lumen supported, I mean, it's just a Kier supported church with Pastor Gale.
Yes, Pastor Gale.
Isn't it kind of fun? I could see that character potentially appearing here.
Isn't it kind of fun that like the show keeps seeding just how much control Lumen has spread throughout at least Kier? Okay, so the town of Kier. We get the ant farm. I don't recall this detail, but people online called out that Gemma sneezes twice, which is something Mark remembers about her in a different episode. Don't remember that, but I'll take their word for it. And this kind of then kicks off the whole pregnancy thing. But first we have, and I really like some detail here, the dinner with Devin and Rickon. What I wrote in my notes is that the dynamic between Mark and Rickon has all the same elements, but a different tone.
Right, exactly.
Meaning that he's still rolling his eyes at Rickon. Rickon's kind of eccentric, but there's like this love underneath it that's totally not. Mark is just over Rickon when we see him in the modern timeline.
I've always felt the implication that the four of them were much closer prior to Gemma's death. I think there's been these little lines along the way that indicates this is two couples that spent a lot of time together and were, I mean, they're family, of course, but also just a close friendship there.
Totally. But I think what's so good about it is that if you're to write the version of Mark and Rickon where they got along, you'd be really tempted to like tone Rickon down. Be like, well, he didn't used to be so weird. No, he was weird. The difference was pre-grief Mark found it endearing. Post-grief Mark just he has no room for it. He can't stand it. That's really, really well done writing.
And we do get a sense that like Rickon just lets his walls down a little bit in season 1 when it's any Mark outside, and Rickon says something along the lines of, "I know that you think I'm an idiot." I mean, this is a paraphrase, but it's the first time we kind of get a sense of like a real human behind all of this weirdness.
Yes. The miscarriage scene is just devastating. Like, this is really well done. I love that the show doesn't need to beat you over the head with it. There is an interesting shot when she's in the shower. I didn't catch this, so I'll give credit to sleuths on Reddit, that the camera focuses on the grout in the bathtub.
Okay.
Because in the Christmas room, she gets a degrouter later on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Did not get that.
I don't know. I don't know if that means anything or not. Okay, so they wind up at the fertility clinic, and if you watch carefully, who works at the fertility clinic?
Is it Dr. Maurer?
Dr. Maurer walks by very briefly. Very, very briefly. Dr. Maurer, master of disguise, by the way. I know we'll get to him in a second.
I love that.
But my first thought when we saw him was, wait a second, the guy's hair was gray. In the last episode, the whistling dentist's hair was gray, and his hair is black. Turns out that doesn't matter. He's just going through vats of hair dye and wigs and whatever.
Yes, you're right, because we threw around the idea that could this be Bert? I wasn't sold. Yes. I think you were so on it, but this is even better. Brand new character, and you're right about the disguises, because he does not have to do this. He could go in as himself every time, but he's into it.
Right. Yeah. Well. We'll get there. I can't wait to talk about Dr. Maurer. Okay, so then we continue forward. They mention third time's the charm when he's trying to inject her, and then she says, "I'll write you a thank you note," and he says, "I hate writing thank you notes." I'm putting the emphasis is mine, but he says, "I hate writing thank you notes." That's really interesting to me, because what's the interaction, and I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but let's just go there for a second, between what Gemma's experiencing in MDR. Mark is not incidental to it, whatever's going on. So is some of the suffering his? Like, is the thank you note thing because he hates writing thank you notes? Or it's also possible I'm reading way too much into it and it's just a call out that something they reference later. Okay. So that fails. We have the shot that sort of begins the emotional distance between them. She gets the failed pregnancy test. He calls out to her. She shuts the door. This is when Chikhai Bardo comes in. So she gets the Lumen card in the mail with the test. And she mentions, we know it's that this test is related to fertility because she mentioned she must have gotten on a mailing list at the fertility clinic.
Right.
And that's why they're sending it to her. So this is a further extension of that. We know it's lumen, and that those cards are exactly what we saw from O&D.
Right.
We now know that she at least is interpreting it as a person fighting themselves, which is kind of like anti-Jungian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and it. By the way, brief aside here, when I was mentioning the underworld stuff, it's worth pointing out too that within a lot of Jungian adjacent writings, there's a strong mythological emphasis, especially on the concept of descending into the underworld as a process to confront and integrate your shadow self. So again, here, even with the playing of the underworld mythology, we continue down this Jungian line that the show's been playing with.
I also want to, before you move on, I also wanted to mention that last week we mentioned id, superego, ego,
yep.
And this week it comes back around. So I think we were seeing last week that they might be playing with some of those ideas and who is the most true self of these different people. There's Innie Mark, there's Outie Mark, but is the Innie version the truest nature of Mark? And
right.
I think they are still tackling that issue.
Yeah, it's a question the show wants us to be asking. So we're on the right track with it. So as she's filling out the test before they start their fight, she says it's one of these things where you're supposed to draw a duck or a rabbit. And what was the figurine that we saw on Milchick's desk? He has the duck or rabbit optical illusion. They're doing the same thing. So I was very proud of ourselves for finding that.
When you say they're doing the same thing, what do you mean exactly?
That there's a connection between the symbolism they seeded in the show and what's going on here.
Okay.
I don't know what it means, but it's interesting.
Like this Milchick. So is this just a fun connection for fans and viewers, or is it that it actually means something to Milchick to have that there? Is he, how closely is what he does as the manager of the severed floor connected to what's happening on the testing floor, or just a bigger? Well, I don't even think the testing floor is the end game. There's a bigger end game.
Yeah, is there a floor beneath the testing floor?
Not just that; it's like the Cold Harbor room can't be open yet.
Right. I don't. It's another one of those things where what is it? Does it mean anything on a plot level? I don't know. Does it mean anything on a thematic level? Absolutely. That the show is telling us to look at things in different ways, and that you might not be seeing what's actually there depending on how you're interpreting things. I don't know where that applies exactly, but the show's direct now in consecutive episodes, they've called our attention to that concept.
Mm-hmm.
So I would pay attention to that at least.
Perception.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The last thing in the flashback is the last night when she leaves. Where's she going? So she mentioned charades.
Party, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Like you would think maybe Devin and Rickens.
This is also where, like, okay, let's just entertain. I know both of us said we don't buy this, but let's just play with it for a second. The idea that she's going along with Lumen.
I mean, I don't want to say I don't buy it. I bet I'm 40-60. I'm 40% that she could have initiated this and it was not what she thought.
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. If she, and I think the not what she thought thing is key. She might know she's going away for a while, but doesn't have any idea what she's about to get herself into. Mm-hmm. So I think that's possible. And certainly the scene is vague enough where you could read it that way. The I love you, he doesn't respond. She starts to, but doesn't have to repeat it. And then he says, I love you too. That same exchange happens in the thank you card room between Dr. Maurer and that Innie Gemma. The difference is he does have to say it twice before she reluctantly repeats it. Mm-hmm. So the show is doing two things. It's really smart. Number one, it's drawing our attention to make a connection between both those relationships, but it's also saying, even though Mark and Gemma's relationship is strained, there's still a qualitative difference between what's going on with Maurer and her. So they're the same but different. I think that the lack of her having to fully repeat "I love you" the second time, I saw a lot of significance in.
Well, do you think there's any version? Like, we know that Gemma has to. It appears that every room she goes in, she's severed into a different person.
Yeah.
So do you think any version of her innies? It's hard to put those words together. Any version of her innies loves Mauer, or I mean, my impression is that they're just torturing her in every room.
Yeah, we didn't see anything that indicates any version of Gemma likes Mauer at all.
No, but Mauer, for some reason,
he's a big fan.
Yeah, very big fan.
All right, so let's get to the underworld.
Okay.
So my first question is,
or the testing floor. We could just call it the official title.
Yeah, but I'm going with my title because I like it better. I'm proud of myself for teasing out references. My first question is, when do any of these scenes take place?
Mm-hmm.
We can ground some of them later, like when we start talking about the nosebleed, put us back and everything. And then we see her as Miss Casey supervising Gemma. We know when those took place. But how long we are from where we start to the end, we know it's not the very beginning, because she's been through this enough where she can look at, the outfit, and without having any memory of what happens when she wears it, knows her teeth are going to hurt, and so she expresses at least some association with it. So it's been going on for a while, but it's not clear when these early scenes are taking place. So maybe it doesn't matter.
I mean, I might just be naive, but because I guess I just placed it in the present day of what we're seeing as viewers. So we're post season 1. She's been sent back to the testing floor, and now she's going through all of this.
But if the underworld scenes take place in chronological order, that we know that's not true.
Say
more. Because we have the scene with Miss Casey talking to Innie Mark when she's observing Gemma.
Helly.
Observing Helly. That takes place in this chronology.
When did we, just remind me, as we saw all these different flashbacks, so we see some of that, but then we do see her go up and become Miss Casey in the middle of...
Yes.
Okay.
We know that the thing with Miss Casey is sometime very recently, because it takes place after Drummond makes the comment about the nosebleed. Now, it's also possible they're Tarantinoing this whole thing and the chronology's all over the place, but I don't see anything that indicates that. Doesn't mean it's not true. But it's, again, this, if we take it at face value, the chronology at face value, at least some of this takes place during or maybe even before season 1.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that.
So we have the nurse, who I don't think the nurse got a name. She was very friendly up until the end, when she looks very unfriendly at the end.
Really? I always sensed that she was like a tiny bit sympathetic towards Gemma.
Not at the end.
At the end, what happened at the end? Remind me.
When the elevator opens after Gemma's escaped, she looks pissed.
Okay.
Like, she is full-on evil nurse at that point.
Okay.
No, and probably because she's going to get in trouble. She might have a valid complaint.
I think there's probably Mauer that's at fault here.
Yeah, but Mauer's high enough up where he'll find someone else to blame.
Yeah, but do we know he's that high up?
Oh, he's got to be. He's talking with Drummond like an equal.
No, not an equal.
Yeah,
Drummond says that thing about you don't have to dress up, or why are you wearing that, or something.
It's a... that's 100% a pure conversation. You think Drummond pays any notice of underlings and what they're wearing?
All right. I guess let's see.
So at the beginning, when she's getting the blood tests, the nurse asks her, "Where did you go?" So like there's this, and Gemma's eyes are just dead in this scene, but we learn that it's her. And so she's also doing this whole disassociation thing, which is similar to what Mark and his recovery is. The implication is they're both kind of experiencing the flashback section memories together throughout this episode. Again, the editing is just phenomenal. So we have a little bit of the tests. I sent you a picture I took, that the eye tests on the wall, one of them is normal.
Yes.
The other one is goats.
Yes. And why? Why would that be?
I don't know. Totally missed it the first time. Did you happen to notice that?
I didn't see it.
Yeah. So the right hand eye test is all goats. And I guess you say which way the goat is rotated, which feels a lot easier than a typical eye test.
Yeah.
Number one, you have a 25% chance of being right. So not practical. A lot of the questions she asks her are about like her health and everything. But then she says, have you done your reading? Why does Lumen care if Gemma's reading?
You think it's,
I don't know,
like religious documents?
But what she's reading is the death of Ivan Ilyich.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. And then we get the off-the-wall question. If you were caught in a mudslide, what would you be more afraid of, suffocating or drowning?
What was your answer?
My answer was, isn't it 6 of one, half dozen of the other? Like, if you're in a mudslide, don't you drown by suffocating?
Yeah, the same thing, but just pick one.
Drowning just sounds horrible.
Yeah, I'm going with you and Gemma. Drowning.
Yeah, drowning sounds really bad. Okay, we get the rooms. Before we enter them, of course, they correspond to file names who seem NBR working on, but they also are all cities.
Yes.
Why? What? I don't know what this is.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I know it's impossible to predict. Let's just think this through for a second. We have Innie Mark at his desk, typing on things, doing something with the numbers, filing them away. We know they're related to the Four Tempers. And then somebody's watching him do that. Meanwhile, at some point when they do everything they have to do to complete that file, it corresponds to a room that can then be opened up on the testing floor. I mean, is all that true so far?
I think so. I mean, the scary numbers, I feel like one interpretation is that there are people in those rooms of whatever file they're working on, and they're capturing their emotions.
Okay. So they're interacting live with, but then why can't Cold Harbor be opened yet?
And that is the flaw in that interpretation. I don't know.
You and I had wondered, is what the innies see on the screen different than what anybody else could see, maybe from the outside? I think that is true, right? I mean,
well, at the very least, when we get to the doppelgangers, very David Lynchian, by the way. When you ask like why, I mean that's at least one answer, is that it's thematic. They're looking at them through the screen, so if nothing else, the screens are a spy cam, or like everything else.
You could also think of it as just a mirror. It's just the exact other side, the dark side, the shadow side,
and they're sitting in shadow.
Yes,
right. Like, okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll get there very soon. First, we have Dr. Maurer, who, the second you see Dr. Maurer, like, oh, this guy's totally evil. Just instant evil. I've never, I shouldn't say never, but I can't remember the last time a character who had previously not been introduced just made such a strong impression instantly.
Yeah.
Great character, really well done from an acting perspective. You know, after I had my split-second disappointment that I'm wrong about it being Bert, and then another few seconds being confused about the color of his hair, like, this guy's just awful. And
I bet it's the same, but I do think it was the same actor that we saw.
It is. You're right. You're right. It is the same actor.
Yeah.
And I think they obscured him probably to send us all off theorizing and to hold back his reveal, which is fine. So when you hear him whistling Edmund Fitzgerald, you're like, oh, here we go. And it's great. Is there a connection between what's going on in the Wellington room, which, why does Wellington have to do with the dentist? No idea. And when we were in the perpetuity room in season 1 and they had all those pictures of everybody smiling and it focuses on their teeth.
Oh. Yeah, I don't think so. Do you think there's a connection?
It's entirely possible that those are all test subjects and not happy people whose lives Lumen has made better.
Wow. Yes.
I don't know. Okay. This is when we get to the doppelgangers. I don't know what any of this means, and I love it.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Well, I mean, at the minimum, they're just monitoring, which makes sense because they're always like the severed floor is always being monitored.
Yeah.
But yes, why do they have to look like them? They don't.
Why do they have to sit in the dark?
Yeah.
And I just want to caution everybody to not over theorize on this stuff.
Yeah.
Some of this stuff is going to be thematic and aesthetic more than it is a clue.
Right.
That said, knock yourselves out with theorizing about where the doppelgangers come from. So let's just go crazy for a second. Are they lookalikes or are these true doppelgangers?
What do you mean by that?
Are they? Did Lumen hire?
What do you call a true doppelganger? How would you define that?
So, in my mind, a true doppelganger is not just somebody who vaguely looks like you, but is a true copy of yourself, your double.
You're saying Lumen, not cloned, or maybe cloned. You're saying Lumen copied.
I'm gonna give it a more supernatural spin than that.
Okay.
I'm gonna put on my tinfoil hat and say full blown doppelgangers until I'm proven otherwise.
When you said supernatural. Is that, or no?
Supernatural, for want of a better word. Let me put it this way. A doppelganger, in my mind, is like the good Cooper and the bad Cooper in season 3 of
So you're saying demonic?
I wouldn't say it's demonic, necessarily. Didn't we do a whole episode on doppelgangers once upon a time?
I'll check, but that sounds
right.
Yeah,
I'm sure we did.
So you're thinking Twin Peaks?
Yeah. This is like a Twin Peaks-esque doppelganger. Oh.
Okay.
One of them lives in the White Lodge, one in the Black Lodge. Okay. I don't know if I'm right, and I'm not going to be upset if I'm not, but as long as we don't know, I get to put on my tinfoil hat and go for it.
Yeah. I'm not going to look for this episode anymore. I think you're right.
Okay. Yeah, just don't worry about it right now.
Everybody. Yeah.
So Drummond in this scene, this is when he asks, are the Severance barriers holding? So that's at least part of what they're testing.
This is huge.
How much trauma can you inflict on an innie and not have it go through to the outside? Mm-hmm. The prevailing theory is that at least part of what Lumen is doing, and this goes into what Jaime Egan said at the end of last season, is soon Kier's gift will be available to the whole world or something like that, is that they are testing this to be able to market it on the outside. You get the chip, and then when you go to the dentist, you can go into innie mode. I think there's got to be more to it than that, but it does seem like something like that's going on.
Well, we've seen this with pregnancy and labor.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They're already doing that.
Seen that. And this episode calls us back to that in the recovery timeline. They deliberately reference that. Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah, you're right, because right now we have the elite able to use this technology, but are they investigating how can this be for the whole world?
It sure seems like it. And that's a good segue to the next part where Gemma asks Maurer about Cold Harbor. And so I don't know exactly when all these lines took place, but we find from conversation between Drummond and Maurer, Drummond is telling Maurer when she gets to Cold Harbor, you'll have to say goodbye to her. She's going to have to go away. Something like that. He says it a couple of times.
Yeah.
And then she asks what will happen in Cold Harbor, and this is when he says, you will see the world again, and the world will see you. And now that I think we know a thing or two about how these writers operate in terms of theory, that's just theory bait. Dangling in front of all of us. They want us to just go nuts with that line. Well, I'm also sure it will have some importance.
Yeah, and we heard Maurer say, Mark thinks you're dead. He married somebody else. He now has a daughter. So as far as Maurer is concerned, it seems like he doesn't believe Gemma's ever actually going to see her real outside world.
Yes.
So, yeah, because he has no problem lying to her at this point because she'll never find out that he's lying from his perspective.
Are we sure that's a lie?
You're saying this could be in the future?
It could be, or it's possible that Mark impregnated Helly at the Orkbo.
Okay, but it says he's married somebody else.
Does it say married? I'd have to go back and watch. Doesn't matter. But yeah, you're right. It's likely it feels more like a lie to mess with him than anything else. Okay, next scene, we get a nice little Lost reference with the turbulence room on the plane.
Oh, yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah.
Do you think I didn't actually take it as a Lost reference, but I could see what you're saying. Do you actually think that they're referring back to Lost here?
Totally.
You can
100%.
see how I'm looking at all these rooms is, I mean, this is not a big secret, but these are all traumas that you've already mentioned it. These are all just like, what is your biggest fear? Crashing in a plane, the dentist.
Yeah.
I guess the Christmas card is, I mean, it's annoying and painful, but not a big fear.
Yes.
But,
yeah, no, I mean you're right, but it can also be that and a Lost reference. I think given just given the importance of Lost in the mystery box genre,
right?
I don't know how you see a plane presumably going to crash and not at least read a little bit of Lost into that.
It's crazy. As a giant fan of Lost, I did not think Lost during that scene.
Well, you were just in full Severance mode.
I am. I'm in full Severance mode.
Okay, then we get the thank you note scene. We talked about the grouter, or de-grouter as it is. Mm-hmm. This is like, I mentioned this to you when we were messaging. This episode's really not funny. I mean, and there's a few moments like this that kind of have the show's wit, but they feel more creepy than funny. And I think that's to the show's credit, that it can be deeply funny, but it knows when to pull it back. So like when Mauer is correcting her and saying it's a de-grouter, actually, like that would normally be funny, and it's a well-written line, but it strikes us in the tone of this episode as creepy, not funny.
Right. He's tormenting her.
What is maybe a little funny is that, did you catch the song playing in the background?
I know it was a Christmas song.
It's Baby It's Cold Outside.
Okay.
Which, I don't have any time for people who get up in arms about Baby It's Cold Outside. But given that people do get up in arms about it, it's kind of funny that as she's abducted for Christmas, they're playing a song that could have some dicey interpretations to it.
Right.
In this scene, there is a gift box on the table or something like that next to the thank you notes. And on that gift box is a picture of a goat. So there's your goat reference.
Oh, wow. I'm glad you watched these episodes twice. I did not see that.
That one I have to thank Reddit for pointing out. And then this is also where we get the I love you repetition. The difference being what we called out earlier. That difference is significant. Okay, we're almost at the end of this part. So first, I know I told you this already, but I'm going to pat myself on the back because I haven't seen anyone mention it. We see her eating a slice of pie, and the fork she is using, and I caught this instantly, is from 2001.
2001, A Space Odyssey, Ben's favorite movie. Yes. Go ahead.
And David Bowman, when they're on the Discovery, he and Frank there's very distinct cutlery that they're eating with. It has a very distinct look to it. And if you look it up, you watch the movie, compare it to this scene, they're identical. No one else has caught this so far as I've seen. I'm the only one. So well done, me.
What are they telling us? Why are they directing us to 2001 in this scene?
I think it's just in general. Yeah, I mean, the show has referenced Kubrick a lot. And obviously most of those references, I think, have come from The Shining. But it's just a design homage. I don't see anything deeper than that.
I haven't seen Eyes Wide Shut since, 25 years ago, maybe more, possibly. But for some reason, from what I remember about the tone of that show, I would feel like Severance could relate to the tone of Eyes Wide Shut. Do you see that? You've seen it many times.
Yeah, definitely, especially depending on how you interpret Eyes Wide Shut, that how tight your tinfoil hat is when you're watching that movie, that there's potentially themes of brainwashing in it. There's certainly themes of abduction taking place inside of it. There's themes of the elite and even just some of the, it's funny you mentioned that because I wasn't going to call it out because I don't have anything I can just point to, but there's like Eyes Wide Shut has a really particular cadence to its dialogue. And there were moments in Mauer and his interactions with Gemma that made me think of Eyes Wide Shut, just in the cadence of how the dialogue is constructed. Like for, Eyes Wide Shut has, and I don't think this specifically happened, but just to give you an idea of what I mean by cadence, it, like all throughout the movie, dialogue gets doubled. So like Tom Cruise will say, where exactly are we going exactly? the word exactly repeated there, or a character will say something, then another character will repeat it back in like a questioning way. And that happens all throughout the movie. And so it just has this really, like, the dialogue in Eyes Wide Shut is extraordinarily unique in my mind. And something about this episode, I'd probably have to watch it another time to say more specifically, hit on that. Okay, so I do have in my notes here that I wrote down, he says your husband remarried, so I'm going to go ahead and say you're right, and that this is a lie. I guess the baby part's the only thing that could potentially be true, but even that's a little thin given the timing. Another connection to Mark and Mauer, similar to the I love you scene, on the other end, Mauer makes the same Ivan Ilyich joke. Let me guess, he dies at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But again, just like we saw with the I love you sequence, we are told to pay attention and make the connection, but then to see the differences between them. When Mark makes the joke, he says, like, spoiler alert or something. It's this whole meet cute thing that's going on at the blood drive. Mauer is being contemptuous at this point. So he and Mark, it's like, okay, I'm developing this thought in real time, so it could be half-baked, but let's just think of the concept of doubling in this show. We, of course, have any Mark, outie Mark. That's easy. We have, now 5 billion any Gemmas. That's easy. We have the doppelgangers. Now we're getting a little woo-woo. We have pre-grief, post-grief Mark, like these different versions of him. Now we have, his evil twin in Mauer.
And even the name Mauer just sounds a little bit like Mark.
You're correct. You're correct. Just like he's the evil version who has, they both love Gemma. I think that's clearly established in this episode, that Mauer is infatuated with Gemma.
Yes.
And to the extent we call it love, it's an evil love. It's not a wholesome love.
Yes, Mark has a sweet love for her.
Yep.
And whatever Mauer's feeling doesn't seem like there's not like a soft side to it. No,
not at all. Not at all. Mauer's love is a love that wants to control, and obviously he's her abductor, so it's not as though we're being subtle with that concept in his character, but still, I think we're very much being asked to draw parallels between Mark and Mauer.
Let me ask you this about the testing floor. We've seen Gemma. We saw her walking the dark halls and no one else around. But are there other captives down there?
Oh, there have to be.
Yeah, there has to be. Right?
There have to be. The internet's favorite theory this week is, and I'm not necessarily endorsing it, this is for information purposes only, is that Irv was once a testing subject. That's how he knows he's got the elevator in his subconscious. And if you really want to go crazy with it, Bert was his doctor. Bert was his Dr. Mauer.
Wow.
I would love if that was true. No idea.
But you're saying, the now outie Irv doesn't remember what happened to him on the testing floor.
Correct.
So there's a alternate version of the original Irv.
But also, and I'm just going to, the internet didn't say this, but I'm going to just run with crazy theory for a second. Drummond's concern, are the severance barriers holding, implies that they haven't always held,
right? Which
could explain why Irv has at least some knowledge in his outie self of what went on down there.
I had said earlier, when they released, if they are ever going to, well, let me start over. I had said earlier about Mauer line about Mark being remarried, indicating that he didn't think Gemma was ever going to learn the truth. And I thought, at first I took that as meaning she's never getting out of here, but they could totally sever this version of Gemma. So yes, it is Gemma with all of her memories from before, but they could sever out this version of her. So for her, no time has passed. She disappeared. She shows back up. She's back with Mark on the outside, but she has no memory of the testing floor.
Correct. They could wipe her mind, all sorts of stuff.
Yes. And so you're saying that's maybe what happened to Irv. Hey, before you move on with you bringing up Irv reminded me of something I just wanted to mention here. Because this episode is so good, and it focuses totally on Gemma, but we may have kind of overlooked the fact that Helly never appears in this episode. So this will be the first episode without Helly and without Dylan. I was going to say without Irv, but if it was John Turturro in this scene when they recreate Miss Casey standing over Mark at the computer, we do see the back of presumably Irv, but again, that could have been not necessarily that actor in that part because we never see the face. But so these three actors, if you want to round up and add Irv, do not appear in this episode.
It's wild. So this is where Miss Casey escapes, and this is like the implications of this scene are so devastating for a couple on a couple levels. Number one, Gemma thinks she got out. She doesn't realize she's 2 levels deep. So she doesn't have any idea. In fact, let's again play with the idea that Gemma went along with this willingly. When she goes up to be Miss Casey, she might be being told, you're going to go visit Mark and you just won't remember it when you come back.
Yeah,
we
because
don't know.
She knows that she's taking that elevator.
Correct.
But they have dressed her up for it, though. That's the only problem.
Fair enough. We're theorizing in real time, so it's going to be thin. So it's devastating because Gemma thinks she's escaped, but it's also devastating because this is Miss Casey's back. Like she's that version of Gemma is completely at sea about what's going on. If I have one criticism of this episode, it's that we were robbed of another scene of Milchek frantically running through the halls to prevent another emergency. But he clearly showed up from somewhere because he's in his motorcycle jacket.
Okay, see, I was going to go the other way and say I think this proves our theory that he lives there. Because
he doesn't live there.
Because he showed up. I mean, this is quick. I mean, this even if he had taken his motorcycle from home, how do you get to the office in just the time it takes for somebody to take an elevator up?
Well, but they were looking for her for at least a little while.
Minutes.
It's possible. I don't know.
I think he lives there. I still think he lives there.
I don't think Milchek lives there, but we'll see. That can be your new "it's always winter, never Christmas" theory that you hang on to. You got to have one. And then Milchek's lies are just so transparent. Your Audi was visiting an art exhibit and got on the wrong elevator. Like, he doesn't even try.
Do you think she knows? Like, do you think she has any sense that this is just like that doesn't make any sense?
I think she's very confused.
Yeah.
And then she starts to ask, where's... cuts her off, but when she goes down in the elevator, we hear Gemma whisper, Mark.
Okay.
So I think Miss Casey... Again, it's playing with this idea that yes, all these versions are severed, but there's something in the subconscious through all of them. Miss Casey is about to ask for Mark.
Really?
We don't know that, but absolutely.
Okay.
I'm convinced of it. And then the editing in this part is so good because the devastation on Gemma's face as the elevator opens is edited against Mark going to the door with the police officers to find out. It's really, really good. And the way it brings those two storylines together is just perfect.
It's one of those moments where it feels like there is no time. They're experiencing this moment together.
Yeah.
Even though they're separated by years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, that leaves us with just the Mark recovery storyline, which is the shortest of the 3. So don't worry, this won't be an hour and a half Severance episode. We've already gone longer than the actual show is, but that's okay. I think Ragavi she's not my favorite character, but she's not my favorite character because she just says things and does things that are horrifying. Like when she says there might be some deficits and does not elaborate at all.
Yeah.
What does it mean there might be some deficits?
Yeah.
I guess we'll find out. Great moment that happens here when Devon learns that Gemma is alive definitively from Ragavi. Here's why I really, really like this. So, beginning of the season, we have the episode where Mark and Devon are saying, well, what did it mean when, your Audi said, who is alive? Or she's alive.
Yeah.
She's alive. What did that mean? So a dumb show would have done this. That's now the season 2 mystery arc for these two. That would have been awful. Like, you basically can spin your wheels, stretch the show out another season to get your characters to where the whole audience was at the end of season 1. That would have sucked. And the show put that to bed really quick with Mark. A not dumb, but maybe not as astute show would have just had the characters instantly believe and be as convinced as the audience was about what that meant. What this show did is brilliant. It didn't spin its wheels, but it allowed the characters to have the moment of discovery. And so instead of turning it into a mystery box thing, they turned that into a character thing. We saw Mark go through that in episode 3, and now we saw Devin go through that same moment of, I'm 90% sure, now she's 100% sure. It was great. Mm-hmm. Really, really well done.
Yeah, totally agree.
This is when we bring up the Damana birthing retreat.
Right.
So we'll see what happens in the next episode.
Is that what's called, Damana?
Demona, I forgot how it was pronounced.
Kind of spelled like demon.
It is a little bit. I was spelling it phonetically, so I wrote Damona. I don't remember how they pronounced it in the show. But you're not wrong.
Okay.
Devin comes up with the idea to call Cobell.
Oh, what a bad... This is such a bad plan.
But she's going to do it. You know she's going to do it.
I thought she was not. I thought she'd made up her mind not to.
Cobell's coming. We're going to see Cobell again before the end of this season.
I mean, yes, we have to. But I wish that Devin wasn't doing this.
Ragavi drops a juicy piece of information about Cobell, depending on how literally we want to take it.
I missed it.
She said she was raised by them.
Oh. Yeah.
How literally do we want to take that?
Yeah, that didn't seem surprising to me, because she's such a true believer. Like, she's totally in on whatever that belief system is.
There's a difference between being a true believer and like the implication that the Kier cult is raising children. And my mind instantly went to Miss Wong.
Well, that's what I said, the Wintertide.
Yeah.
I think I brought this up last week, and you're like, why does that have to be young people? I think they have some sort of academy or like system for kids.
The Hitler Youth Lumen style type of thing. It kind of
seems like that.
I'm still not convinced, but you could be. I'm more convinced this week than I was last week. And then I think the last thing is Mark waking up at the end, which is just a wonderful bookmark on this episode.
Tell me, because I only watched it once, remind me what exactly happens when he wakes up.
It's just the end of the episode.
He doesn't say anything?
He doesn't say anything. He opens his eyes. We know he's alive and okay. Devin has a moment. Cut to credits.
So at this point, then you think Cobell... Okay, we agree Cobell will come back, but you said you think Devin will bring Cobell back into the story herself by calling her. Why would Devin call her at this point if Mark's awake? Or do you think it's already been done?
It's possible it's already been done. It's also possible that when Mark realizes Ragavi got out of town, he says to do it.
Call Cobell?
We don't know what version of Mark is going to wake up.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because now that I think about it, when I was watching this the first time, I imagined that I was seeing Innie Mark on the outside. Like the Innie Mark version is who woke up.
It's possible. We don't know that, but and the show is so good with getting us to lean into assumptions that we shouldn't necessarily make.
Yeah. And I think we can agree that why am I forgetting the name? What's the name of the process that they're doing? Integration. The integration process is not complete, right? Because she left early.
Correct.
So we'll
see.
That seems bad. All right, you want to hit the music and we'll do some post?
Do we know that though? Because floating the chip seems to be not just another part of the process. That seemed to be Ragavi saying, we're going to go all the way and float the chip.
But she still had all of her stuff there. I mean, when she packed up, she didn't give... Well...
In a plastic crate as she totes her brain surgery materials out.
I guess she didn't say, here are some instructions on continuing this process.
None!
So maybe maybe he's good to go.
Ragavi does brain surgery, 0 post-op instructions.
Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of incredible.
All right, so you had said you wanted to read a little quote from the book. I've got some feedback from the listeners. Let's
okay. Well, let's hit the music.
Let's hit the music. Yeah,
and then we'll do that after. I don't know how this is going to go because I'm about to click this, and I don't think it's going to start the way yours starts. But let's try it.
No problem. I mean, will they hear it
correct
on the actual episode? I can hear it. This is happening. Listeners, what an awesome episode. Thank you for joining us here. Thanks for joining us on YouTube if you're watching us that way.
Yeah, thank you,
YouTube.
YouTube.
Rare occasion of us being on video. But for now,
Let
that's all
me know
from
if
here.
you like the hat.
I love it.
Your Audi wears hats now.
I'm Matt Anderson.
I'm Benji Bodo.
And we are the Sci-Fi Christians, signing off.
Goodbye.
All right, let me read. I'll read one piece of feedback, then you read your quote, and then I'll read some longer feedback to knock this thing out.
Perfect.
Here's Sam, listener and friend, says, that last episode of Severance may have been the best episode of TV I've seen. Absolutely devastating.
I totally agree.
All right, I'll turn it over to you for your quote, and I'll get the other email ready.
So this is from The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It occurred to him that what had appeared perfectly impossible before, namely that he had not spent his life as he should have done, might after all be true. It occurred to him that his scarcely perceptible attempts to struggle against what was considered good by the most highly placed people, those scarcely noticeable impulses which he immediately suppressed, might have been the real thing, and all the rest false, and his professional duties and the whole arrangement of his life and of his family, and all his social and official interests might have all been false. He tried to defend all those things to himself, and suddenly felt the weakness of what he was defending. There was nothing to defend. So to me, that quote, in addition to just being thematically rich, possibly ties into Severance in that through the process of death, so two things. First of all, is through the process of death, Ivan Ilyich has a reorientation of values. What he thought mattered doesn't matter. That could be part of what Gemma's journey winds up to be. The other thing that's really rich about it, and it goes beyond just that one paragraph, is that what we find is that Ivan Ilyich's conversion happens precisely because of his suffering. So if Lumen is attempting to eliminate suffering from the world by allowing you to foist it all on an innie, they are removing the opportunity for growth and conversion from the people who take the chip.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes sense. All right.
So we'll wrap this up with feedback. Yeah,
wrap this up with feedback, listeners. If you want to send in feedback about Severance or anything, you can write us at feedback at the sci-fi-christian.com. Today we have Wayne, longtime friend, longtime listener, all the way back to the very beginning of the Sci-Fi Christian. Here we go. Wayne says, hi, Matt and Ben. I'm going to stop a little bit along the way because he's got some questions, Ben, so be prepared for that.
All right.
Thanks again for your fantastic coverage of Severance and for being the first podcast to let me know about this brilliant TV series a few years ago. Chikhai Bardo is a near-perfect episode of television. It is a masterclass of acting and storytelling. Lumen definitely has agents in more places than originally thought. Sure, Drummond stated that Mark completing the Cold Harbor file could be one of the greatest moments in the history of our planet. It's starting to look like it may not be something good at all. Maybe reintegrated Mark will sabotage Cold Harbor's progress. Do you think so? What do you think about
that? It's possible. I think we're at least going to learn this season what Cold Harbor is.
Yeah, my sense is that they're the story. I trust the storytellers, but my sense is that not completing Cold Harbor would feel not. It would be unsatisfying. I feel like, but anything could happen. All right, I'm going to read on. What do you guys think about the fact that so much of the Audi world in every episode of Severance looks like the 1980s, but we have seen modern smartphones on 3 or more occasions this season? Why is Lumen doing this?
So I think we touched on that a little bit earlier in the season. I don't think it's a clue. I think it's an aesthetic choice in the show.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Is Kira in Pennsylvania? Do we know?
We don't know, but the implication seems to be it's Great Lakes-ish. So it could be.
Where is Kira located? Is it in the near future? I'll stop at each one. So you already said where is it located. Do you think it's in the near future?
It's in the vague present.
maybe part of one of our eastern states split that was purchased by Lumen. That's interesting. The state breaks up, Lumen buys a piece of a state, and now they're just running it as their own thing.
I would be shocked if the show gets into that. It feels like the town of Kier is a given in the show.
Well, I have to get back to handwriting my many frequent Christmas cards and to figure out what's for dinner. And of course, he ends up by saying, "Go Pack, go."
That's a gross ending to that email.
Because we're Vikings fans. He's a Packer fan, but we can live with that.
Unfortunate. It's also so the line about Christmas cards reminded me of one thing. I've been joking about how you think the show is Narnia.
I don't actually think it's Narnia.
I know. But,
I just specifically said I don't know if Christmas exists in the world of Severance. Obviously, it does. All right, go ahead.
But the line, the line in Narnia is that it's always winter, never Christmas.
Right.
But for that innie, she says it's always Christmas.
Yes.
It's like this. It's
like they're speaking to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely. I think they're interacting with Narnia at least a little bit. That's why I said you're right thematically, even if you're wrong on it being a clue to something.
All right, Ben. I don't know how we wrap up videos. Do we just hit stop and just
we say goodbye, everyone. Well, and then I hit stop, and then we're done.
Listeners to both in the podcast feed and on YouTube, thank you for listening. We appreciate you, and we were already signed off. So long, folks.
Goodbye.